Welcome to Use Your Items, a video game podcast about the philosophy and design of video games. My name is Jason, and with me, if you can find him, if you can hunt him down in Neo Kobe, it's Francisco Martin. Fran, are you real? Is that really you?
How can I tell you're not a snatcher?
Well,
I've never actually, honestly, I haven't seen you going outside during the daytime.
Well, let me ask you this. You're walking in a desert and you come across a turtle flipped onto its back. What do you do?
I take out my gun and start blasting.
No, not the turtle.
Oh, I meant you, because you're asking me questions that are making me very, very uncomfortable.
Yes, this is the point. Well, welcome. Good to see you, Fran. Here we are, right around Christmas time, 2024, and we have just played yet another Hideo Kojima game.
A Christmas Hideo Kojima game.
Oh, yeah,
I did not expect that.
Yes. Oh my God. Yeah. Okay. So today's episode, we're talking about the hit game Snatcher for the Sega CD, and
more like cult classic.
I mean, the game sold like crazy though.
Which
it sold well enough that they re-released it 4 times with 5 versions.
We will talk about that.
All right. Anyway, I think the hit game Snatcher by Hideo
in our
Kojima.
Hearts.
Yes, which is a Christmas game. It was certainly a jump scare to me when you end up in Alton Plaza and you hear Jingle Bells playing. I remember I turned to Aislinn and I was like, this is so weird. I wonder what's so cyberpunk about Jingle Bells. There's nothing cyberpunk about Jingle Bells. It's Christmas time.
Oh my God, yeah, and you see a Christmas, you see Santa Claus, the game just becomes a grand old time, don't it?
I love this game. I'll hit you with the free one right at the top. You can turn the episode off now. I think this game's great. I can't wait to play it again.
Oh really? Wow, that good.
Listen. I'm not gonna replay it tomorrow, but I look forward to picking it up again.
I can't wait to play the SD version, and we will talk about that at a little bit later, in 10 to 15 minutes or longer. But before we get too far away from it, yes, we are talking today about the Hideo Kojima classic Snatcher, developed by Konami and team. And Jason, would you like to do the honors and doing this behind the box? It's a bit of a long one, so I'll let you decide where you want to stop.
I would love to. Yes. Konami, Snatcher, AD 2047, Neo Kobe City, Japan, a place of madness and decadence. A mysterious bioroid life form has appeared. Its true nature and purpose are unknown. Is it some country's secret weapon or an alien from another world? They slay their victims and take their place, earning them the nickname Snatchers. A new police division, Junkers, has been formed. They are trained specifically to combat the Snatchers. The fate of mankind hangs in the balance. The war between the Snatchers and Junkers has begun. Enter the cyberpunk world of Snatchers as Gillian Seed, a new Junker recruit. Use your military special forces training, the latest high-tech weapons, and your android sidekick, Metal Gear, to hunt down and destroy the Snatchers. This role-playing game brings you a thrilling mystery with beautiful women, cold landscape, and deadly adversaries. Think carefully and watch your back.
Oh boy, we're gonna make this joke over and over again, but I do love me some Blade Runner.
Why not? It's Blade Runner, yeah. Hell yeah. The world could do with more good Blade Runner.
That's fair.
Twists.
That's fair. And honestly, I guess how do you want to tackle this? Do you want to tackle this do you want to tackle first the game design, what you're actually doing, the story? Because we say we both joke and not joke about Snatchers being Blade Runner. So I don't know how much of the story we actually need to get into in the spoiler-free section other than it's Blade Runner.
I mean, I think we can talk about the story a little bit, but and I certainly want to. It's a narrative game, so I'm certainly in my element here. That being said, I think let's start from the top as far as what kind of game are we actually playing here.
Sure.
And then I'd really like to hear from you on the history that I know you found out. You got pretty deep in the rabbit hole here on kinetic novels, visual novels, adventure games, the Japanese desire, their hunger for this style of game in the 80s and 90s. So I really want to get into that. We could talk about the story after all, once we, I think, get a good baseline. You know,
Sure.
we need a nice layer of bread before
Let's
we
do
eat
it.
before we eat the rest of our dinner.
So, bit of the game design. It is from Konami's mouth, it is a cyberpunk adventure. And immediately, viewers, you might be thinking, oh, cyberpunk and adventure. So it's probably kind of like Cyberpunk 2077, right? Or Deus Ex Machina or something like that, right? Where you are exploring the world and you are maybe doing some combat, upgrading, all these different stuff. But no, because you might, if our stats have given us any information, most of our listeners, hi lovely listeners, are from the Western Hemisphere. And yes, it makes sense that your first thought is that, but no, it is not that type of game. It is a visual novel. By Western definitions, and we are going to get into that a little bit more because it's a very interesting thing to talk about. It is mostly a visual novel with some level of FPS minigame, and that's a very very loose.
It's rudimentary
FPS. So it is pretty much the screen is divided into a 3x3 grid. You move your cursor to that grid and you shoot. The enemies are always going to be somewhere in that 3x3 grid. And it has some light puzzle deduction systems, a la Case of the Golden Idol, and a bunch of other games that are Duck Detective as well. So stuff like that.
So if you think of your classic detective novels, your detective games and stuff like that, you're in this space. It's a text-based adventure in
which I wanted to
more Western terms.
In more Western terms, yeah, because I wanted to talk a little bit about that, about genres, because this is such a good case study of how amorphous genre definitions are. Because at the end of the day, genres are a marketing tool, of course, and marketing is just as important for the work that you have versus the audience that you are targeting to. So there is 2 points of every marketing campaign, right? You need to think about what does my product do, what it is, and all these things. Who am I trying to target this towards? And within a culture, we treat genres kind of pretty objective, right? Like within Zeitgeist, we know something is an FPS, we know something is an adventure game, we know something is an RTS, RPG, all that stuff, fun stuff. But outside of your country, your culture, you might realize that the definition of a genre might be a little bit more ephemeral than you would expect it. Snatcher was first released in Japan, and we will talk a little bit about its history later on, and it was released as a cyberpunk adventure. Because to be honest, to call cyberpunk Snatcher a visual novel in Japan would have been such a broad term. It's like, we are releasing a book. We are releasing a game, a movie.
Yeah. It's not dissimilar from like calling music metal, right?
Yes.
Where we can get extremely granular when we get into different subgenres of metal that all have different takes and nuance. And then there's that greater encapsulating thing. So just to kind of make a corollary here, and then also
that's a perfect
depth
example.
of that.
Yeah.
The depth of the genre in Japanese game development is much different than in the West.
Yes, they have essentially there's a subgenre within visual novel, and that's essentially where they how they sell it. They don't sell it by the genre visual novel, they sell it by that subgenre, because calling something a visual novel, especially at this time in Japan, would have been so like it didn't matter. Like it didn't say anything about the game. It didn't market the game as what it was meant to be, which was to be a cyberpunk adventure. And I just wanted to bring all this just to like really quickly give a bit of my personal history, I guess, with Snatcher or with visual novels in general. It's no secret. I have mentioned before that I am not a big fan, or I wouldn't even say fan. It's not that I dislike visual novels. It's just that it's not for me. I usually do not go after visual novels. I get a little bit bored with them. The only visual novels that I've liked are, let's say, Telltale games. That's light visual novel affair. Yeah. I tried Doki Doki Literature Club and was not for me. And I also liked Snatcher, so a little bit of a spoiler alert. So I just wanted to say, hey, just open up, give an opportunity for our audience to open up their to the experience of trying different genres. Just because you think that you won't like a genre, or you think a genre is what it is, you allow yourself to experience a lot of cool different stuff if you don't close off types of games just because you don't like that genre.
Yeah, I think on that point too, it's worth noting that it's pretty easy to write off retro games or games that have a more retro feel like this. And if your reticence to pick a game up like this up is fiddling with different particular programs that are good at playing old video games, and their settings are difficult, I totally recognize and respect that. I was trying to get this to run on an emulator on my Steam Deck, and I could not get it to register the game. When I came down, I think I figured out the problem. RetroArch can't read ISO files. That being said, I think that this is actually a very approachable retro game, and I think as far as overall visual novels go, this is a very approachable visual novel. I have a little bit more experience in the genre than you, but still, I'm very much a noob in the space. I played through parts of Paranormasight. I loved what I played. I want to go back to it at some point. I played through most of, I think, half of Thousand Times Resist. I didn't finish it, but I want to. I started 13 Sentinels. I have a problem where I start these games and I have a really hard time finishing them. And a lot of it comes down to I feel like I want to be a lot cozier when I'm playing them. I actually think I would have a lot better time playing them on my Steam Deck or on my Switch than on my PC.
Gotcha.
So
you've hit us with your personal history of visual novels. How about the cyberpunk genre?
I love cyberpunk. I have been a huge fan. I'm mostly a science fiction reader by virtue, I guess, by choice. I've read most of them for a long time. In fact, I'll give a peek behind the curtain. But one of my oldest and most used screen names from when I was 14 years old is Wintermute Inc., which is a reference directly to Neuromancer by William Gibson. And Wintermute is the name of the AI in Neuromancer. Sorry, I guess spoilers for Neuromancer, but it comes along pretty quickly. So
I actually, that's a very important thing to mention about Neuromancer, and that's the cyberpunk genre, because I'm a big fan of the aesthetics of cyberpunk. We've had these discussions off screen. And I'm a bit of an enjoyer of the stories that have cyberpunk elements. I wouldn't go as so far as to say that I'm a fan, just because I'm not I haven't read Neuromancer. I haven't read Snow Crasher. I haven't watched.
Snow Crash is wild. That game that book is out of control.
I haven't read it. I haven't watched Johnny Mnemonic. I haven't there's so much.
Wow. There's some good stuff there.
There's so much out there that I haven't partaken in that I'm not 100%. I would kind of feel like a poser to say that I'm a cyberpunk fan.
You can be a fan, you're just not an expert.
Okay, fair. Then I would say I'm a fan, because my relationship is so tumultuous with it, because I understand that it is supposed to be a warning, and it is dystopias, and it is very gritty, and it's the authors were like, we are writing these as exploring a future that might be such that we don't fall into those trappings and we don't go into that world. But it's just so cool looking, like some stuff, some of the aesthetics is just so cool. And I'm gonna be a bit vulnerable here, and let me finish this hot take. But I kind of get what Elon Musk was going for with the Cybertruck. Like, I personally think the Cybertruck looks pretty sick. Obviously,
very vulnerable. I see.
Obviously, it is a piece of trash, as we've heard through many articles, accounts. So essentially, I almost empathize with Elon Musk when it comes to wanting to get that cyberpunk aesthetic. Even though I truly believe that Elon Musk doesn't understand that it's supposed to be a dystopia and a warning. He sees it as we should get there as soon as possible. While me, on the other hand, I'm we shouldn't get there, but it doesn't hurt to look like that sometimes, because it is a vibe.
Right. So, yes, techwear, streetwear, like hyper neon, like all that stuff. Like the visual aesthetic is very appealing, I think, to many people. And even the sort of the gritty dirtiness of it is, in its own way, has some appeal as well.
Yeah.
I think I have nothing nice to say about Elon Musk or what he does, particularly the Cybertruck. I do see what his aesthetic goal was, and I can appreciate.
I'm gonna be honest. Yeah. Maybe not as a vehicle, but just as a work of art, the Cybertruck might be one of the most cyberpunk products ever, in that it kind of looks the part, and it's also a trash corpo garbage that has been shoddily made yet pushed out in the name of capitalism. So, like,
it's cyberpunk in all of the wrong ways. Yeah,
cyberpunk in all.
It's
like, the fact that it exists is such a cyberpunk move, but not for the reasons Elon Musk thinks it is. It's because it's literal garbage.
Right. Yeah. I think that, just to bring it back in terms of like cyberpunk as a genre and as an idea, a little background from my space is I read a ton of stuff in this space, a lot of Philip K. Dick, William Gibson, Neil Stephenson, a lot of these major authors in the space. More recently, I've read Becky Chambers. She does a lot of stuff in what might be more commonly referred to as like solar punk, but I think it shares. You can't really get to solar punk without walking through cyberpunk first. And in that space, a lot of it is a direct response to rapid technological advancement and a very real-time witnessing of like analog death and digital birth and the intersection of these two things. It's a very prolific space, especially nowadays with Cyberpunk 2077's resurgence in terms of just quality and play and DLC and stuff like that. The RPG that it's based on has surged in popularity as well. Locally, to me, there's a game that meets every single week in public and plays, which I don't even see a D&D group meet weekly in person. So that's kind of impressive. But
I low-key, I haven't given 2077 another shot, but I low-key would love to try the tabletop RPG.
Yeah. The tabletop looks cool. I have not played it myself, but a lot of, like, to my earlier points, it's just a lot of what's going on in cyberpunk is exploring the humanity in technology and the humanity in the digital space, but then also it is a very real, very direct reply to extremely corporative and political pressure on the proletariat and the lower class. There's quite a bit of Marxism wrapped up in proper cyberpunk adventures and cyberpunk stories and stuff like that, because it's very often is the case where there's extreme corporate, militaristic, or political powers, and they tend to be all coincided into one with private corporate militaries and things like that create these dystopian views. I think that most cyberpunk should truly be read as a dystopia until you get into the solarpunk stuff, but without belaboring the definition here, there's a lot of really great stuff in the space, and I think Snatcher fits very squarely in the midst of it.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit. Let's bring it back to Snatcher. We've been laying the groundwork for cyberpunks that Snatcher is going to honestly not stand on, but will stand on the shoulders of Blade Runner, which is standing on cyberpunk.
So Blade Runner is an adaptation of Philip K. Dick's novella Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Mm-hmm. So to start, it's like Blade Runner's doing a Do Androids Dream, and Philip K. Dick is a very cool story. I'd love to tell the story of Philip K. Dick sometime. He's an incredible figure in literature. Anyway, continuing. Yes, Blade Runner.
But just like Blade Runner, this game has like 7 different versions. Snatcher, it is not as easy. I did not know that it was as easy to determine which Snatcher you'd play. Luckily for you and me, it was very easy because there's only one English release, and every other one is in Japanese. So here we're going to hit you with a quick rundown. So Snatcher releases for the first time in November 1988 on the PC 8801 on, I believe, 3 floppy disks.
Let's go. That cyberpunk is fuck.
It did not. You needed to have a Soundboard 2 expansion card on your PC 8801 to play the music, and you're gonna want to because the music in this game is so good. No voice acting in this version. Bunch of gibberish sound effects, kind of like Animal Crossing or Sims. And here's the big one that I did not realize. I was super surprised by. No third act. So just to give a little bit of information to the listener, the game is divided into 3 acts, or the one that we played, the Snatcher for the Sega CD. And this original version only had Act 1 and Act 2. No Act 3.
What? What do you even... That's...
Act 3 was supposed to be in the sequel, which was canceled. And a little bit of more information about like how big this game was meant to be. Originally, the team wanted it to be 6 acts. And Konami was like, you're not getting 6 acts. We're cutting it down to 2. Which later on, when we talk about the story in the spoiler section, makes a lot of sense to me. There are certain aspects of the storytelling that makes a lot of sense if the story was longer, but it being so short kind of had some detriment to some character relationships. But we'll talk about that when we get into the story side of things. Shortly after, next month, Snatcher releases on the MSX2, which is also a floppy disk computer system, Japan only, once again. The game actually had to come with extra RAM that you installed to be able to play music, which bumped up its price to be more expensive than the PC 8801, which apparently was super rare. Apparently, PC 8801 was more expensive, but neither here or there. Again, no third act.
Okay.
No third act here. From then, this is where we go off the deep end. This is you thought that this was gonna be just, you know what, they little by little like add more. They Nomura it with the final mix of Kingdom Hearts and just try to add a little bit by little bit, or George Lucas it, or even actually even Blade Runner, Ridley Scott with the different cuts of the game, of the movie
film.
Of the film. So the next one in the series, or if you could call it that, is SD Snatcher for the MSX2 again on April 1990. This is 2 years after, Japan only. And actually, this isn't a Snatcher like a port of the Snatcher one. It is a full remake of Snatcher in an RPG style, RPG gameplay. SD stands for Super Deformed, which is another name for chibi character designs in Japan. Japan, they call it Super Deformed. And they added 2 story elements, post-Act 2 story elements, which became the basis for Act 3 from here on out. So the first time Act 3 came out in anything was in a spin-off game of Snatcher. It didn't even show up in Snatcher proper.
So when you say it was fully remade into an RPG, this was a video game it was made into,
This was a full new video game, full new, like the story is pretty much the same, but if you look viewers at the play style of the game, it essentially was random encounters, but every time you got into a random encounter, you played the minigame, the first-person shooter minigame.
Right.
Almost. So it was then you can like upgrade your weapons or different weapons you can switch between and all these different things. It is
kind of cool.
The game Snatcher is 80 hours long. SD Snatcher is 20 hours long. It is.
That's a big game.
It's a big.
That's
game.
A really big game.
The fact that this game, I could not go down the rabbit hole. I don't know much about SD Snatcher, but the fact that SD Snatcher has the same story as Snatcher, and yet Snatcher is the one that is popular.
12 hours. I don't understand how you add 12 hours to the story.
Man, I don't know what
12 hours? I mean, it's got to all be driving back and forth from Junker HQ.
Yeah, I have no idea. But yeah, this is the first time SD Snatcher. Then finally, in October 1992, so 4 years after the first Snatcher comes out, Snatcher CD Romantic, as it was released. Nice. That's a CD-ROM, dear listener, CD-ROM-mantic.
For our younger listeners, that's a type of physical media that was used to store different forms of data. So as opposed to a thumb drive or the memory in your iPhone, it's a round disk.
Why did you decide to explain this and not floppy disk?
Because everybody's eyes start glazing over when they hear the word flop. I feel like floppy disk is more grokkable than CDs for some reason. Like it's like such an old, like such an iconic visual, like physical media. I don't know.
I imagine because because all the save icons are still floppy disks.
Yeah. That's exactly it. Floppy disk is the save emoji. And, CD-ROMs are the round, shiny, silver emoji.
So,
we
released...
lost 50% of our 3 listeners.
So, released only in Japan as Snatcher CD Romantic. First home console release on the PC Engine, which most people are like, what? Well, the PC Engine in North America is called the TurboGrafx 16. And that one you might know.
Yeah. Hell yeah.
So at
American
this point,
naming.
American name. Let's go. It's graphics with an F and
an X. No I.
GrafX. Okay, super cool. This is the X Games generation. This is when finally voice acting is added in. Also added high quality music. They remastered all the graphics, added facial expression during conversations. Jason, I don't know if you went back and looked at some gameplay footage of like earlier before CD Romantic. I didn't. It is a lot more DOS, a lot more like it is definitely obvious that it's a computer game. We played a good version of it, I think. I think the Sega CD version is probably one of the better versions. Yeah,
I was blown away playing this game. It's so pretty.
Mm-hmm.
It's so beautiful. Like I think the animations really, really clean. I mean, some of the pixel animation can be a little wonky, but for the most part, I think it looks really, really good. I was shocked. I played with the scan lines on. I was in my shit. I was absolutely in my shit.
And then finally, we arrive at the Snatcher Sega CD, December 1994, the worldwide release of
I was
Snatcher.
4 years old.
I was 1 year old at this
herself.
point. So what happened here was that Konami wanted to make a game like the classic, the groundbreaking Night Trap. And if you don't know,
Sorry.
if you don't know why Jason is laughing, you deserve to go out and watch a gameplay footage of Night Trap.
Oh my god. Wow. Yeah.
So just so
this
you
is
know,
the best thing that I've ever heard in my entire life. This is, dear listener, what Fran's about to explain to you is the way this information came into our hearts is the only reason we are playing the game Snatcher on this show.
shout out to Tim Rogers and the Tokimeki Memorial review.
Action button review.
Action button reviews. So Night Trap is a game with live action footage on a console. So already that's actually pretty groundbreaking. But in which
full motion video,
my bad. Full motion video. In which the only gameplay is that you have, I think, 2 buttons, one to switch between cameras that are recording the most PG horror movie of all time, where it's like a sleepover, but you know how in like a lot of horror movies, you like in sleepovers, you're like, oh, there's gonna be sex and murder and blood and all these different things.
Yeah, Night imagine Trap, Friday. Yeah,
it is so like, so there is no sex, there is no blood, there is no murder, there is nothing.
No violence, really.
No violence.
It's like if the kids at your church camp were told to make a horror movie based on Friday the 13th, but they've never seen it.
Yes. And what's more is that, just this is a total tangent, Night Trap was, along with Mortal Kombat, one of the reasons the ESRB came around to be. I have no fracking clue why they chose to pick on Night Trap. It was probably just because of the idea of it rather than the actual gameplay of it. In any case, Konami wanted to do their own Night Trap. They're like, wow, this is the future of gaming, full motion video. This is crazy. We want to make our own version, and we're going to release it worldwide, including in the West. But they deemed it too difficult. They were like, oh, they looked into it. They looked into what Night Trap did, and they were like, wow, that is way too much work.
I think this is a really interesting moment in video game history, and it's such a weird moment that Snatcher is crystallized around, because I feel like for such a long time, and probably still there's echoes of it today, where there's this conflation of the graduation of video games is to enter the space of photorealism.
Mm-hmm.
And the most obvious way to do that was to actually record artists, record actors, just like in film, just like in movies. So I think it's so cool to see that in the 90s, really early on, very early video game developers were trying to bridge this gap towards photorealism, and graphics were nowhere near close enough, but we had film, and we could replay film on digital devices. And in that same era, we're coming out of the 70s and the 80s. This is the early 90s when Night Trap comes out. So we're coming out of the 70s and 80s of all of these auteur filmmakers who proved that you can have unbelievable, substantial works of art in film that are also, popular. They have wide appeal. This isn't watching... oh my god, I'm gonna like show my ass here. It's like it's not like watching like old black and white film like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari or something like that, or The Seventh Seal. This is like The Godfather. This is like Apocalypse Now, Stanley Kubrick, Francis Ford Coppola, Martin Scorsese. All of these artists came out of the the 70s and 80s, and they were these geniuses. They were these film school kids, and we see this space where video games are really interested in figuring out what they are. And I don't think that I think there were some people like Hideo Kojima, Oh my god, I can't think at all tonight, Fran. Who did? I really feel like I'm showing my ass. Who did Mario? Dude, I couldn't think of Shigeru Miyamoto. I am so sorry, listeners. I have a video game podcast and I forgot Miyamoto's name. Yes, so that's crazy. That's yes. Luigi's gonna come after me if you know, you know. Lord. So like you just have these incredible artists who are making video games and understand very well what the position of video games are, and they know how they I think can see maybe more clearly than others what this medium is capable of. Mm-hmm. And then there's this whole sector in the West particularly that is hyper interested in making video games into something that they aren't really ready for yet.
Yeah.
And so it's a cool moment to see Snatcher crystallized on. And there's a lot of other really incredible artists and game developers from this era of the 70s, the 80s and the 90s that I think have this understanding of, you want a Night Trap, we'll give you Snatcher. Mm-hmm. You know, you want The Godfather, we'll give you Super Mario Brothers. But like,
are you saying that because they're Italian?
Oh wow, I'm better than I realized. Yes, I am.
Damn,
yes, I am.
So good.
Yeah, exactly. So it's cool. It's just cool to see how all of this video game history is crystallized on randomly Snatcher.
Yeah. So Sega CD Snatcher, named just Snatcher. Finally, we have the name of the game, not having a weird additional CD romantic or chibified or anything like that. Several scenes are censored for the Western audience. Nudity is cut back. Some more extreme gore. It's not really that it's extreme gore. If I recall correctly, there is a scene in which there is a dead dog at one point in the game, and in the non-censored version, the dog is twitching and like dying rather than dead, which is in the version that we played. Characters from other IPs were removed and made into Konami characters. Because we are starting to see here Kojima just take inspiration and love from everything else and starting putting in. Some examples were Geiger's Alien was in the game originally. The Kamen Rider was in the game originally as well. So a lot of things change here to have it for a Western audience. This is the first time as well that they add the third act that was introduced in SD Snatcher. So they've done it. They've released CD Romantic added the third act. Snatcher Sega CD made it so that the third act was playable, in that before Act 3 was just a movie. It was essentially just read what happens throughout the whole Act 3. Now we have some gameplay in Act 3 on the Sega CD.
It is.
What could it be? Then after that, January 1996, Snatcher releases on the PlayStation. Again, Japan only. Again, graphics and music were completely redone. Once again, they made this game remade this game like 5 times.
That's what I'm saying. Like whether or not this game made a ton of money, it's like it made enough money that Konami kept shitting it out.
I guess we can talk about it here. This game did not make much money. It was a commercial failure. Even if you count all the different releases, the only reason that Konami said that they did it was because A, fans kept asking for it, B, it had huge critical acclaim, and C, every time the game released, the audience that they were releasing it to, they were like trying to recoup their losses of like, oh, the reason it did poorly was because it was PC only, so let's go to consoles. Oh, the reason it didn't work is because it's a visual novel. Let's try it as an RPG. Oh, the reason it didn't work is because we only released in Japan. Let's go worldwide. But every single time, it actually did not hit any of their commercial objectives.
I'm ready for the Snatcher remake by Naughty Dog Studios.
Here's the thing.
Third person.
And here's the thing. It's so much so, like, I read somewhere, this is not true information. Like, this, take this with a grain of salt. I just read an article with no source at all. Apparently, it only sold around 5,000 copies in US. And that is why a sealed copy of Snatcher goes for a few $1,000s right now.
Oh my god.
So apparently
that's not that much money to own a copy of Snatcher, though. How's my 401k's up? Might be a good year.
Oh my god. I come in next time I come visit you, your whole room just has a Snatcher all over. You bought all copies of Snatcher.
Yes, I'm sitting on the Snatcher time bomb, as it were.
And then in 2011, September, you got it. You said it. You wanted a remake. You wanted 2011. That was only around a decade ago. That's it. We're getting it. You get Snatcher. SD.
Snatcher?
ATCHER, which is an episodic radio drama prequel.
I'm going to find it and listen to it because I've definitely listened to way worse stuff driving around New England. So yeah. Snatcher didn't really face too many obstacles during production. It was a bit of a headache that just comes with the natural progression of technology of, like, they were breaking new ground in porting to new places, voice acting, localization. Like, these were things that were not really done back in the day. Like Konami, one of the good interviews in Entertainment Gaming Monthly from 1998, I believe it is. I'll have to get you that information. Actually, I have it down here. January 1995 talked about how localization was probably one of their most expensive and difficult portions, because at that point in time, like, all localization was like a couple cutscenes here and there in between Contra levels. Right.
Easy. A full game that has branching storylines with voice acting? Oof.
Yeah.
A bit difficult.
Multiple thousands of lines of text.
I think it was, if I have these numbers correctly, it was 7 voice actors. They ended up with over 2.5 to 3 hours of nonstop talking. Like, if you put it end to end, the whole thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, quite a bit. Quite a bit.
Yeah. I did you like the voice acting?
I liked, I personally am somebody who doesn't mind campy lines and campy movies.
Oh, there's a lot of them.
So I personally, it did not bother me at all. I wouldn't say that it's a masterpiece in voice acting, but it's actually pretty serviceable for the 90s. Like, it is, if you think about other dubbings in the 90s, it was pretty darn good. I
thought it played really, really cleanly.
Yeah, but this is also coming from a bias of me coming with these, like, early 90s dubs and just being okay with that. But I did play this game with my partner beside me watching as I played the game, and she was a lot more impacted by the dubbing. She was like, ooh, what is that? Why are they talking this way? But so it might be just that our ears have had this acquired taste of early 90s dubbing. So who knows?
The whole thing just came off to me as, like, yeah, definitely 90s camp, but it just had, like, there's like a sweet spot where I think the voice actors doing the English dub were trying really hard to hit that, like, transatlantic, like, Casablanca, like, old noir, like, Dragnet type, but maybe not Dragnet, but like, old detective, like, movies speech pattern, and it's also a dub, and so there's a lot of layers to the way the actors came out, but I was pretty impressed.
Obviously, I don't know Japanese, but at least I saw some gameplay footage of the Japanese version, the PlayStation version, and at least the voice acting in that one sounded immaculate.
I
again,
only heard Gillian.
As somebody who has no idea if it's actually good by Japanese standards or not. So real quick, cultural impact, and then we will jump into the story doing this a little bit out of order just because the story is such an important part of this review. All of the Snatcher versions were, as Konami said, only popular with maniacal players. And that is a quote. I don't know why they decided to call it that way.
I am now a maniacal player. I am going to be updating my Blue Sky profile as we speak.
In other words, they were commercial failures. Only reason, as I said, Konami kept on trying was it was constantly requested over and over again. I'm actually quite surprised there hasn't been a re-release since 1996 in Japan and 94 in worldwide. Even when like visual novels right now are making a bit of a comeback in the West, essentially. Like they never left Japan, but in the West, visual novels are starting to get a little bit more of the respect they deserve. So it's, I wouldn't be surprised if a Snatcher re-release ever happens. It is out of Kojima's hands at this point. Konami owns the rights of Snatcher, and Kojima has left Konami. So who knows?
I mean, good for Kojima. We want Kojima doing all of his own crazy shit. Mm. I just wish Snatcher went with him because,
yeah, that's fair.
I don't know. I would love to see him come back and try to do Snatcher with like
the 30 years
of 6 acts, 30 years of experience, 2 Death Stranding games. Sign me up.
So this is something that I would love your input in. I think I don't know how much Hideo Kojima games have you played before and after Snatcher from a release timeline? Like, have you played any of Kojima's games before Snatcher?
Like
Metal Gear.
I played the 2 Metal Gear game. I played Metal Gear Solid 2, Sons of Liberty.
That came out afterwards.
Okay, you're saying games that came before this? I
played
a little bit of the original Metal Gear.
Okay. I would argue that Snatcher is when finally Kojima was given the opportunity to be weird with it. Like,
yeah,
I feel like games, I've played Metal Gear. I played a little bit of Metal Gear 2, Snake's Revenge, or whatever it's called. And those games, actually, the Metal Gear 2, I don't believe was directed by him, so it doesn't even matter. Doesn't even come to the conversation. In any case,
I thought there was 2 Metal Gear 2s. Doesn't matter.
Okay. We can look into it later. But this game is the first time that I am seeing Kojima shine and come out of his shell as this interesting, weird, tons of references to media I love, political intrigue, characters called Random Hajil, weirdness that comes with any Kojima game. I feel like Snatcher is the birth of that. And I am honestly kind of surprised that after Snatcher was such a commercial failure, I'm surprised Konami actually let Kojima cook so much, because holy, after this it's Metal Gear Solid, and that he cooked.
Right. Well, I think there's something to be said for Kojima's utter confidence in a game like this, and I love when a work of art is, if nothing else, very blatantly confident in its vision and its execution. And I do think that Snatcher is a very, very confident game. I think it's extremely well executed, and I can see why it played well with critics. It's like it's a very like literary interested game. So it's a game that like rewards you for having read a novel in your life. So like critics would love it, especially critics in the 90s who were probably not video game critics first and foremost. Video game journalism was nascent. And I agree. It's seeing that it's so rare in physical copy, and it was only ported to the US once, and it was kind of a commercial failure. It is surprising that Kojima kept getting work, but I also think that there's probably a sense that Konami knew that Kojima had like, you don't write Snatcher and get all this critical praise and then commercial failure without actually having something going on. So I think, it's probably a matter of putting all your horses in the right place. But,
yeah. Which, by the way, a little bit before I forget, Kojima worked on the first 2 Snatcher games. He worked on the Sega CD games. He didn't work on all the remakes. He didn't work on, for example, SD Snatcher. He worked actually on the radio drama sequel, a prequel. Yep. He did actually work on that. So there is a little bit here that is outside of Kojima's
purview.
Yeah, purview, just because, for example, there is a scene added in Sega CD version that was removed later on because it was a scene that was added with new voice acting. Since they were adding voice acting, they added the voice acting for it in Japanese and in English. But for some reason, for the PlayStation version, they went back to the original voice acting. And since they didn't have the new voice acting in the original voice acting, they essentially remade that scene to just have the characters be silent.
Interesting.
It is all over the in true Ship of Theseus fashion, which is a popular cyberpunk philosophy just question. This game, there's no way of telling what is true Snatcher anymore. It's been changed around so much that now at this point in time, you just need to call it Snatcher, the concept of a video game, rather than Snatcher, the game that was released for X console or computer or radio.
Right. It's so cool. What a great history for such a small little game.
Yeah.
We were in and out in 8 hours, just about. Mm-hmm. I didn't actually time myself, but I felt like about 8 hours in and out. Mm-hmm. Compact story. I think the storytelling was really solid. A, B, C, very linear plot structure. Nothing too crazy. It's absolutely just lifting very directly from Blade Runner and Do Androids Dream and other big, titles in the cyberpunk space. So I don't think Snatcher really broke new ground narratively, but I think it told the story really well. It was just like a solid, fun romp the whole way through. It was very campy.
Yeah.
It was really, really campy compared to Blade Runner.
And to be honest,
there
wasn't that much philosophy. A lot of cyberpunk stories try to ask a very poignant question about the human existence, the human soul, about what makes a robot, what makes a human a human. You might have remembered this from our Nier Automata episode that we released. I don't think Snatcher really goes too deep into it, any of that. The biggest philosophical question that ever comes out is in Act 3, which we will get there when we go into the spoiler section. But that's probably the only time that a philosophical question about who's who, what's what does it mean to be a Snatcher, what does it mean to be human, ever even gets brought up. To be honest, I don't know if you might, with your expertise, you might have seen more than I did.
No, I mean, I think that my biggest critique, my biggest issue with Snatcher is that it is such a black and white, good versus evil story. Mm-hmm. And I think that traditionally the best cyberpunk stories are really mired in the gray space between moral polar opposites.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it great, is that humanity is this really murky, swampy kind of mess of moral desires and constraints, and it's always trying to find the best path through, and it's you want to be more human, you want to be more robotic, you want to be better, you want to be worse, you want to be smarter, whatever it happens to be, whatever the main crux is. And I think that this is very much a story that's Snatcher bad, Junker good, yay.
Am I out of place to say that Blade Runner is to Snatcher as Star Trek is to Star Wars? Where Star Trek is a lot more interested in talking about the philosophy, talking about like deeper concepts about exploration, sometimes about race and speciesism and all these different things, versus Star Wars is not interested in that. It's a really good movie. It's really like great, but it doesn't care to talk about that or to like engage with that. Is that a fair assessment? Or
what I'll say is two parts. So part one is I agree. I think that's pretty much correct, and I'm happy leaving it at that. And my follow-up answer is the longer one, which is that the problem with comparing Star Trek and Star Wars is that Star Trek is a science fiction story and Star Wars is a fantasy story. And it's a lot more, to me, apples and oranges. It's just that they both happen to take place in space. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's not quite that divisive between Blade Runner and Snatcher, where I just feel like Blade Runner is, in all of the ways that Snatcher is a confident video game, Blade Runner is an unbelievably confident film. And I think that what makes Snatcher so exciting to me is it's just the way that like Kojima lays it out, the way the story's told, the gameplay choices and stuff like that, I think is very exciting. And it feels kind of like a lighter, fair Blade Runner, and Blade Runner is, I think, a lot more thoughtful. It's a very enjoyable film just on its surface, but it's definitely a movie that leaves you asking for more and leaves you asking questions.
So, question for you, I guess. If Blade Runner did not exist, and instead of Blade Runners, we got Snatchers, the movie, do you feel that Snatchers, the movie, would have taken the place of Blade Runner? Or do you think that part of Blade Runner's secret sauce is that morally gray area?
Blade Runner's secret sauce is like Ridley Scott.
Fair.
Full stop. And like also like Harrison Ford like having his hands like written all over that film as well. Like the secret sauce is Ridley Scott's a genius, and there's really no two ways about it. But because reading, like, to go from, like, I don't know, it's very weird because it's like I feel almost like you're asking me, like, if my grandfather was a different person, would I be a different person? It's like,
it's
yeah,
true.
Sure. But
the reason I ask it is because I'm wondering my recent like exploration of games, movies, and mediums, and what mediums are more powerful at telling what stories. Like, I wonder how much of this could have been a movie, how much of this could have been a really sick cyberpunk adventure movie, so to speak. I still think that it's better as a game. I'm not saying that I'm not taking that away from Snatcher, but it makes me wonder, I guess.
Right. So let's use this as a jumping point into the game itself. We're at an hour runtime. I'm honestly shocked because I felt like this would be a brief one, and it's seeming just the opposite. So let's take this as a jumping point. Let's get into. Should we just spoiler it?
Yeah, let's go ahead. Let's hit it.
All right. So, listener, we're going to go into spoilers. We're going to start talking about the story at large and stuff like that, like details of the narrative, Act 3, that sort of thing. So if you're leaving us, thank you so much for joining us. All of our links to research that Fran did and stuff that we watched to get
I forgot our verdicts.
Are in the show notes below. I don't know. We kind of said them earlier, but
I want to caveat because there is a little bit.
Do your thing.
Because I do recommend. I'm so happy that we did this as an episode after Indica, because
I agree.
I feel like just how Indica is breaking new grounds today, yet is not really doing so hot commercially right now. I feel like Snatcher was in the 80s and 90s. Like, it was breaking new ground in its own department, doing its own thing, pushing forward cinematic storytelling within video games. For that alone, I would almost recommend it, just like Indica. The only reason that I wanted to give can I step back a moment and mention this, is that I do have a bit of caveat that this game was released in the 80s, and that comes with a lot of baggage. And that includes sexism. Like, there's no two way. There's no way around it. There's a lot of sexism in this game. Frustrating UX design that I will go more deeper
Really
into spoiler discussion. An ending that I felt was rushed, and then after reading that Act 3 wasn't even supposed to be part of the game, it makes a lot of sense why that ending feels very rushed. And in my opinion, a little bit of arbitrary action sequences. By that I mean you have to do specifically A, B, and C to move the plot forward. If you don't do it, those three things, the game does not allow you to move forward. And it's like
hyperlinear.
It's like you must do this. You must look at this number in the corner of the room, or I will not let you leave. And sometimes it just isn't obvious what it is. It's kind of like in point and click adventures that got lost in the sauce by, I'll combine this candle and this tomato to make a red light filter. Like, it's kind of like that, where it sometimes gets a bit of, I don't know why I came up with that.
That was the best thing I've ever heard in my entire life. Tomato and candle. It's like pineapple and pen.
So yeah, I wanted to mention that. I don't know if that gives you any, like, do you want to give a spoiler-free verdict?
Yeah, sure. So I think the game is very much of its era, to cite what Fran was saying, to echo him. I think that overall this is a really exciting game for me to play, because it's very much in my wheelhouse, like as far as like my own tastes go. I think it's really cool to see the sort of like the early beginnings of this visual novel genre in Japan and its release in the West and stuff like that. I will say, I don't think this game is any more sexist than watching old James Bond movies. And I think you can kind of, if you want to couch it like that, it's fine. Or like watching watching episodes of Friends. There's some really bad ones in there too. So like anything else, it certainly has parts that haven't aged really well. But I think just like visually, it's like really great to behold. It's extremely cinematic, and I really love that you called out that we followed Indica with this, because I was so obsessed with the ways that Indica was treating its visual storytelling cinematically, as like literally lifting the same language that is used so popularly in popular movies today. And I think Tim Rogers points it out really well too, that in Snatcher, like a lot of what's going on is like these really cinematic, beautiful scenes where like there's the scene fades out and there's still a voiceover playing, and it feels really like watching old TV or old movies. And I think like, yeah, my spoiler-free verdict is definitely check the game out for a little bit. I think if you hopped off like somewhere between Act 1 and Act 2, you probably did more than many people ever did, and you probably got a lot out of it. But that's my spoiler-free verdict. I don't think you need to finish the game, but I think it's a really cool one to check out if you have some time.
And I can't wait for the Snatcher re-release coming out in 2027. 2030.
Put it in stone.
Just 2030. 2030 Snatcher sequel or Snatcher re-release. Unsure which one. It's coming.
I am 100% positive that at some point in the next 10 years, either Konami or Kojima will be doing something with the Snatcher IP, I guess. Maybe, Fran, if we're really the lucky ones here, we'll get a Snatcher IP Universes Beyond and Magic the Gathering, a standard-only release. Fran's knocking things over. He's so excited about buying a Metal Gear Secret Lair, where it's every Metal Gear from Rex to Metal Gear Mark II.
I'm in. I mean,
they already did one with Metal.
Yeah, they already did one.
Didn't they do one with? It wasn't with Metal Gear. It's with the artist.
Yeah, Shinkawa.
Shinkawa. Yeah, I actually bought that one. That one was sick.
I'm kind of kicking myself for not buying it, but oh well.
I regret that I sold a lot of those cards. Anyway, that is our spoiler-free verdict. Thank you so much for joining us. We're so happy that you were here. Link to everything you need is in the show notes below. We would love to see you on our Discord. Please hang out with us there, please. We're so lonely. Oh my god. And with that, we will be spoiling the game. Bye.
Bye.
Welcome back to Use Your Items, a spoiler-rific podcast about the Kojima hit game, Snatcher.
I'm so excited to get this with you, Siu Nosage.
You've been working on that one.
I just wrote it down because I was like, how would I even say this? Oh, Siu Nosage.
You know what really got me about the Elijah Modnar random Hajil shit was that earlier in the game, Fran, I was like, I know this motherfucker Kojima did something with a reversed word, and there was so one of the things I'm really excited to talk about is that I took notes. I wrote notes in a notebook while I was playing the game.
I love that.
So all of the phone numbers I wrote down. I wanted to treat it like a real detective game. Like when I played, I wrote everything. I kept a journal when I was playing Obra Dinn.
Gotcha.
So I did that for this, and there was something that I kept writing it backwards because I was like, this has got to be something. And I could not figure out what it was. And at no point did I ever reverse random Hajil.
The thing is,
it was the Oline thing. I kept reversing and trying to figure out like Oline backwards. I was like, Nilo. What's Nilo?
Nilo? Okay, well, let's reel it back a bit so that our viewers that are here and you don't want to spend a couple $1,000 on Snatcher, and
I'm about to buy.
You are a corpo scum that doesn't want to emulate. That's fine. There's got to be some of us.
Who you are.
So let's I'll break it down a little bit really quickly. Just like we said, it starts out kind of like the setting and the characters. Imagine Blade Runner. Gillian Seed, main character. Imagine Harrison Ford, Deckard from Blade Runner. He's an amnesiac from 3 years ago. Doesn't have any memories of what happened then. Is estranged from his wife, who also has the same type of amnesia, and I wish she was written off, and that was it, that we will talk about her, but she will come back, and she will be important.
Yeah, I mean, she's like the only blonde in the game, so you knew she had to be important.
Is Isabella not blonde?
Is Isabella?
I don't know. Is she brunette?
Wait, which one's Isabella?
She's the Marilyn Monroe of
Isabella Velvet.
Velvet.
She is blonde, you're right. Yes, I forgot. Yes. That was such a weird, that was the most James Bond, like that was some OG shit.
Yeah. So the story is called Snatchers because these robots are killing people and taking their place, aka snatching their skin, which I don't know about you. Me and Lauren at the same time thought that they were actually stealing their skin. I didn't know that they were like biologically like recreating the skin in a lab somewhere else. Which was
you got there when they once you got the floppy disk though.
The floppy disk. No, even then I was thinking like, oh, really? Something happens that whenever they put the skin on and it just like interacts with their skin or something like that. But yeah, Lauren and I always thought until the very Act 3, we thought that it was like they were literally stealing skins, but apparently not. Gillian arrives at Junker headquarters, is greeted by Mika Slayton and Chief Benson Cunningham. You learn that the Junker...
Great names.
Yeah, all these names are really good, actually. You learn that the Junker operation is pretty lean. Only 5 operatives. You have a whole-ass building for only 5 people? Are you kidding me? Chief Benson Cunningham, which is the leader in the polling-facing duties. Mika Slayton, she's a receptionist and security. Harry Benson is an engineer. John Jock Gibson as the runner or a field operative, which is also what Gillian Seed does. This is one of the places where I was like, I get now that it was supposed to be 6 acts. I wonder if they had more time to tell the story, if there were just going to be a bigger operation with a lot more runners and a lot more people. Yeah. It does feel a bit awkward that, hey, this threat that is affecting our whole like island, Neo Kobe City, that we are going to like get overrun by snatchers. We are going to assign it to 5 guys. And let's be honest, 3 out of the 5 guys do nothing all day. So it was a bit weird.
I did also feel like the game was particularly like lonely. It was like a little sparse.
Yeah.
Not a lot of just I don't know. Like I definitely wanted more characters in headquarters, but again, to cite like James Bond, this did give me like really, really strong like MI6 vibes where like Bond is always like whenever he's at headquarters, it's like there's like 5 people there.
That's fair.
And you wonder like what's going on. And I think it's somewhere, it's almost believable. It's just like the threat of snatching and snatchers is so imminent and it's so front of mind for everybody. It's not like, right, it's not like Cold War.
Yeah, it's not.
Like tensions
people
in
know.
James Bond where people know that there's snatchers and they're snatching people. I also felt like it was a little sparse for characters. I was really excited when it said that only VIPs were getting snatched, and to me, this is a missed opportunity in cyberpunk storytelling where we could. It's actually extremely relevant to a lot of stuff going on in current events today, but that you have this entire department of the police, the Junkers, who are, I guess, essentially there to stop the Snatcher threat, but the Snatchers are only really a threat to VIPs. And so there's a really interesting dichotomy that could have been, or really interesting angle that could have been explored here in terms of these very important people, these politicians, corporate leaders, rich people, stuff like that, and like their family members getting snatched and what that means. And yet at the same time, like we get in the middle of what is that act, or the end of Act 1, we have 2 snatchers who are literal nobodies. It's like a taxi driver and his wife. Like, yeah, I didn't really understand like the
who,
I don't know. Like I found myself trying to not deeply inspect the like veracity and like continuity of the story, because it gets a little loosey-goosey.
It gets very loosey-goosey. And again, it's one of those things where I think had they had more acts to... Because that's the other thing. You only solve really 3 cases, really, in this whole game. Like the case of Lisa and Freddie, the 2 snatchers that kill Gibson. You discover the Snatcher hospital and where the Snatcher hideout is. Those are like the 3 main cases that you solve. And something that like the big thing that I had problems with the acts, with the not being so short, is that by the end of Act 2, beginning of Act 3, everybody is talking to each other as if you've been together for months and months. And like, this is like, Gillian, I love you. I trust you with my life. I cannot foresee whatever. Like everybody is saying that. Not even the women, which obviously they're women. Of course they're gonna love the main interest character, because otherwise, why wouldn't they be boys? It just feels so much that the game was like speed running things that felt like if we had a longer storyline, then this would have been made much more sense.
Just in terms of everything it's trying to achieve.
But with all that negative,
I know I want to talk about him too. I really do. Game. But there's a fourth mystery you forgot to know.
We can wait.
The most important one.
Who Random Gillian is? No.
So
his amnesia. It's such a non-issue, dude.
Because, and I fucking knew it, Fran. I knew it without asking you, that I knew without a shred of doubt in my mind that you never once picked up the phone and called your fucking wife. When you didn't have to?
I did.
When you did, you have to call her for the story. Did you call, how many I called her. Yes, I called her all the time.
Once.
She wouldn't go. She just wouldn't start. She just doesn't want to love me.
No.
Until
I called her literally once, and I sexually harassed her, and I was like, I'm never calling her again. I'm not giving Gillian the opportunity.
Yeah,
I'm good.
A dog. He's like, a piece of shit.
Like, there were so many times in this game, and I guess I'll mention it now. The bit of my notes here of like the words mattering. that Lauren helped me with this section because she was like, "What the fuck? What the fuck is the difference between look and investigate?"
I wonder if that's a translation or a localization issue.
It could be. So in the game, in the Sega CD version, there are plenty of actions that you can take when you're at a crime scene or talking with people and all these different things. And two of the most prominent ones that will come up over and over and over again is look and investigate, which at first glance is a little bit like, I don't know what the difference between those two are, but you can maybe in your mind kind of decide, you know what, maybe look is more like quiet, like I'm just looking around, it's not obvious what I'm looking at and anything like that, and investigate is more overt, or I'm physically touching stuff and all these different things. The problem is that breaks all over the place. Sometimes investigate is just look at a corner. Sometimes look is touching people. Sometimes look is sexually harass people. Like I clicked look at Mika once to see maybe she's like lying or maybe she's been crying and I can get some information. And immediately he's like, "Wow, you have a beautiful face, Mika." And he's like, "Oh my God, that's not look. That's talk.
He does.
What are you doing?"
So let's talk about the menus and stuff like that. So the whole thing with this look investigate stuff is that most of the time, like you said, look is if you're familiar with Dungeons and Dragons or playing D&D, look is perceive and investigate is search. So you can't search something that you haven't perceived. So if you've ever been in a room with your dungeon master or your game master and you're like, "I searched the room," and they're like, "What are you searching?" You just don't get to do those things. Like you need to have or usually you don't. I guess it depends on your DM, but in my experience, it tends to be like, I want to look around the room. What do I see? Oh, I see a dresser. I want to investigate the dresser, search. So that's how I interpreted it. It was still very confusing, and they use it really loosely. Like you said, I had a lot of issues with that. And it's, and the whole thing that you're pointing out where it's like, you look at Mika and then like, it's Gillian, like giving his like stream of consciousness what he sees when he looks at her is both A, annoying because that's not what you wanted to do, and B, it is very classically, it feels like very classic like detective noir shit where it's like this constant stream of consciousness from the detective, almost as like a I can't think of it, like a overtrack or something like that, but
yeah. But even that, I'd be
he says them all the time.
Sometimes he says these things. Yeah. I don't think, actually, now that I think about it, there's barely any Gillian. I don't think there's any time that we look at Gillian's mind. Everything that Gillian says is out loud. So yeah, it's not like film noir where sometimes you'll get a narration or the Blade Runner theatrical release where you get Deckard's voiceover. It's nothing like that. If Gillian is saying something, you better know that any woman in a 10-foot radius is hearing it.
So he is definitely a bit of a womanizer. I think in 80s terms, you might refer to him as harmless. But that is fraught with its own cultural issues. I mean, there's, like I said, I don't think there's any real sugarcoating of it. He feels very much like in the same space as like a James Bond to me. If James Bond was just unsuccessful.
Specifically the Sega CD version, because there are certain things that I read about the Japanese version that go beyond James Bond womanizing. Where it's like, okay, that's even
well,
that's okay.
And to be very honest, this is the Kojima of it all. So this is something that happens in his next game, Police Nauts, which is in the same space, literally in space. Yeah,
oh, God, I forgot about that.
He does some. I forgot about the same thing with Quiet being such a deep and unbelievable character that you couldn't possibly understand what's going on and why she's always shirtless. And it's like, I think there's just elements of Kojima that are rather unsavory and a little seedy, and this is like part and parcel to a lot of his game design. And
It's kind of like Stephen King, some of his some things that he's written are like, dude, you didn't why did you write about that? That's very questionable. But he's still a great writer. I'm not forgiving him, but it is something that you need to
It's important
realize.
to be aware of it at all times. All that being said, I think as far as like these menus and this look investigate thing goes, I know, listener, that we're also hanging you on this thread of the best character. I promise I'm going to bring it back around, but I can't let go of this menu stuff, which is the look. And then I say something is I was just playing Mass Effect with Aislinn, and she's like, I chose this option and I said something completely different. What the fuck? And I'm like, that is quintessential BioWare. But having played this, I'm like, oh, this is just like, this is just kind of like what it is. This is just like maybe bad video game design or it's corner cutting or lazy. I don't know what you want to call it, but there.
Yeah, and BioWare doesn't have an excuse. They're not that's translating
exactly it. It's like she chooses an option like the Thorian or Species 625, and it's like her character Shepard says the same shit basically. So it's like, why? Like, what's the point of this option? So it's an interesting problem that remains in choose your own dialogue or like role playing games. So it's interesting that it remains here, and I found that very frustrating, and I also found it frustrating that when you get stuck in a scene, like you said, where it's this linear progression where I can only move the story and the game forward once I've found everything I need to find, it just turns into this, like, I have to click every option in every menu until something happens, and very, very frustrating.
I have notes on that, because to go to end yes and you, this is my Albert Einstein once said, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. There are so many times in this game where I am stuck because I'm expected to do the same command 3 times in a row, and there's no indication that the next time I do it, it's going to change anything. Like if you click investigate drawer, it'll say, it seems like it's a genuine antique. And then you click investigate drawer again.
Right. It's like you're looking at it again.
Compartment in the drawer. And then you click investigate drawer again. You find a hidden compartment with blah, blah, blah. Like, why did you have to have me? Like, maybe if you had a UX where it was like investigate drawer, investigate inside of drawer, and then investigate hidden compartment to kind of give me an indication that I am moving forward and something is happening. But the fact that it says the same words over and over again gives you no indication that I was supposed to be doing that over and over and over again to like unlock something that you are arbitrarily cutting me off from moving forward. And what gets even worse is that sometimes the order is that like do it multiple times is squished with another action in between. Like, look at something, then investigate that thing, then look at the same thing that you looked at first again, because now the investigation, since investigate doesn't mean just investigate, it might have moved something. Then now, like, look does a different action. So it's just, there's a lot of branching menu states where you have to end up being systematically just going through every single one now after the other, because you have no idea.
It feels very a very prototypical, like just menu design, like UX design. I think if you want to compare this to like Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney, that's a pretty good place to be, where I felt like in the earlier, like the first Phoenix Wright game, you can kind of get stuck in the scenario where it's like, I know there's something in the crime scene that I need to find and I can't figure it out. So I end up touching everything with my DS stylus on the screen until I find something that I haven't found. And it's like, I can't deduce this anymore. And it's frustrating because you can't, like, you end up having to brute force it, because you're also, it's not the Wordle where it's like, fuck this, I'll walk away and there's a new one tomorrow and I just didn't get it. It's, I am bought into this game experience and I want to finish it. I want to complete it. So it's going to I feel compelled to brute force an answer out of it. And I think this is not a perfectly solved thing. I think stuff like Disco Elysium does a really good job of pioneering just really simple solutions, which is just changing the context menus of like, you want to talk to somebody, you want to ask them questions, and like this game tries to do that, but it feels very much like it's kind of hemmed in by the way it's laid out its menus. And I don't know shit about coding. My guess is that there's probably something in the programming here that is very intrinsic to the design of the game that would likely require a full overhaul, because like just the way that it's like, sometimes like you get an ask menu in the context menus once you've seen somebody or things like that, and it gets very, very confusing. But yeah, there's I think very, very reasonably, if you cleaned up the menus and the UX in this game, you could shave 2 hours off of this game's runtime. I truly think that you could do that.
Especially if you also allow, I guess before we move on, because I was about to move on, viewer, listener, I know Albert Einstein didn't say that. I'm sorry. That was just clickbait. That was just comment bait for people.
That's how we do it. We're like everybody else now, baby. We need the we need the engagement. This is engagement farming.
Not only would the better UX make those like cut 2 hours, I also feel like if the game respected your not intelligence, but respected your not just time, your agency of, you know what, I'm going to let you leave because maybe you figured it out before we expected you to figure this out. Like, there's so many times where I'm like, for example, the mask.
Oh my God, that was so annoying.
In Not Outer Heaven, Pavlov's cavern. There's a point in the game where you need Plato's, where you need to buy this mask because you know ahead of time. I did not need to be told. I was told, hey, if you want to go to Outer Heaven, they have a masquerade day and they only allow people if you have a mask. So I ended up in Plato's cavern. I see a mask and I'm like, and I want to buy that. I need to buy that. I know where this is going. I have infinite money. I know where this is going. God
that
damn
was
it,
a very,
very
frustrating. I had the same issue.
Work. You needed to like look around. You needed to like get the money, show that you have money, talk about Outer Heaven, say, hey, how's it going? Take a picture of Gibson. This is Gibson.
It was very frustrating.
Oh, Lord. It was even longer in the Japanese version. Apparently, one of the censored things is here that a character, I'm not going to say who, saw some porn, and there's a gag of like finding porn. They don't show the porn, but there's a gag of like, ooh, there's
Gillian's
porn.
Like such a loser when it comes to sex. It's like really like he's like
it's like honestly, Johnny Bravo level.
It's like
levels.
that. It's like if Johnny Bravo was on Adult Swim, I guess. It's
yes, but somehow Johnny Bravo still gets the girl. Like the point of Johnny Bravo being funny is that he never gets the girl. If Johnny Bravo got the girl, then it would be icky and disgusting and this sucks. You're harassing women. But the good thing of Johnny Bravo is that he's getting his comeuppance. He's getting his ass kicked all the time. The show is saying this is not right. But imagine Johnny Bravo, but he gets every woman that he ever meets is in love with them, no matter what they say. That's the level of Gillian C. Like, there are so many times where, so the game, when you get to Junker headquarters, always brings you to Mika. I would never talk to her. I would just keep on moving because I'm like, if I'm going to roleplay as Gillian C, Detective Junker, I know that any interaction I have with this woman is going to take me out of the experience. So I'm just going to try to talk as little as possible with this character.
And honestly, like, the interaction with Isabella Velvet was somehow like the most reasonable of them all.
I was so surprised. Isabella Velvet, by the way, is like a strip dancer kind of person.
That was a crazy interact. That was a crazy setup. Anyway, she's a movie star. They refer to her as the Marilyn Monroe of the 21st century, and she moonlights as a stripper. It's crazy. Like, it's like,
yes, it's crazy. And yet, that's probably the most respectful that Gillian has been to a woman, not for lack of trying. You can choose to ask
number,
her for her number or for an autograph and all these different things. So not for a lack of trying, but you can. It is the most respectful that you ever see Gillian see it, and I was so surprised. I was like,
shocking.
"Oh no!"
Especially considering how forward he is with other characters. Katrina is the most obvious issue, I think.
Yes.
But
I don't even want to. I read things about the
imagine.
Japanese version that I was like,
I can only imagine. Yeah, we don't need to get into that. Should we finally drop the bomb that? Yeah.
We gotta drop it.
Yes.
We gotta drop it. I think it's time. Drop the proverbial nuclear bomb
for nuclear bombs. Actually, no. The best character in this game is your Watson, is your sidekick, your assistant detective, and its name is Metal Gear Mark II, and he's this little robot dude. He's this blue robot with a video phone and a big camera, and he has the voice actor's phenomenal. His lines are great, and it's like,
so good.
Yeah, you just have this little robot buddy, and I don't know about you, Fran, I am a fucking sucker for a little robot friend in a game.
Dude, Lauren, this is coming from Lauren. This is all from Lauren. She was like, "Oh my god, Kojima and Konami were able to make BB-8 perfect the BB-8 aesthetic 30 years before The Force Awakens." This is crazy.
Well, that Metal Gear is just like Cal Kestis's droid in the Jedi games that EA did. I think that's BD. I can't think of it right now. BD1. So the BD Explorer droid, and that is so. I hope you're looking it up. It is so Metal Gear Mark II coded. I'm like shocked. And like BD's great. BD's an amazing like accomplice, a companion in the in those games, and I loved Metal Gear. I was so attached to him. All of his commentary was great. He was such a dick to Gillian. He gave it to him straight. And I like that.
The fact that you save him in the first act, like I was about to cry. I was like, don't leave behind Metal. What are you do? Don't you dare! And he just he doesn't sacrifice his life, but he puts his life in danger to save Metal Gear.
I think it was a really great twist on like the detective's partner. It kind of made it into like a buddy cop drama in a way, and so I was really impressed with it.
And I like that Gillian is for it too. Like Gillian, like usually in this buddy cop, like he warms up, but it isn't like as obvious as like, oh, I don't want a robot buddy. He never says that. He's like, oh, okay, it's just a tool. It's a machine, whatever. He never has negative emotions towards Metal Gear at the beginning. It's always starts at a neutral, and then it gets positive. And sometimes there's downs because sometimes they fight and whatnot. Right. But yeah, it's great. I love him.
Yeah, Metal Gear's awesome. And I want to let you talk about the references to Metal Gear stuff and things like that. But I have 2 points that I want to make here. So one of my biggest issues with this game as a cyberpunk story is that it feels very... in all of the ways that Star Wars isn't a sci-fi story, it's a fantasy story, there's a lot of ways that Snatcher is not a cyberpunk story. It's a detective noir story. It just happens to be set. And so like there's this whole thing where there's these Snatchers who are a cutting edge AI alternative life, artificial life form that is taking human lives and replacing them. And like, this is very bad. This is a capital B bad thing that's going on in the story. And at the same time, we have access to a computer called Jordan that has access to this Neo Kobe's database, Alpha 1, which is owned and run by Konami. And it has all of the information from all of the surveillance, from all of the data that this entire city captures all at once. And the game is not politically interested in all of the trappings that I think make cyberpunk are like the baseline good things in the game. And I think your earlier comment about Star Trek and Star Wars was more prescient about because like I'm starting to really come around to this idea now that so much of what's going on here, while it's fun to be in the cyberpunk space, the game is really resistant to that sort of countercultural uprising. It's just not very. It's lacking in these spaces. Like even like Metal Gear being such a like stalwart buddy cop companion is like, it's like weird to me that this is okay, but we have a problem with these bioroids. It seems
Wouldn't
a
we
little
not
confused.
distrust robots or AI a little bit more, given that the bad guys are robots and AI? It really does feel like it is a very, for lack of a better term, a normies like introduction into cyberpunk. Like it is a
sophomoric, maybe juvenile,
like, and not a matured cyberpunk story. And this isn't a bad thing. Sometimes you want to have these more laxed, like sometimes you don't want to throw people into Snow Crasher from the beginning. Sometimes you need to ease them in, you know? And I feel like Snatcher does a good job of easing in, because even Blade Runner is kind of,
it's a detective noir. It's a cop movie.
It's a difficult to watch if you're not in that mindset of, I want to watch something very slow, not action paced, very like mental and philosophical and things like this. Like it is not something that I would put on for my parents. I would say that much.
Yeah, I mean, my dad showed me Blade Runner, so I put it on for him, but my mom wouldn't like it. I agree with I think everything you've said. So it's just, yeah, there's moments where it feels like Kojima has built a cyberpunk world and is telling a story inside of it that is not a cyberpunk story, which is very interesting.
Weirdly enough, it's almost like a prequel to it's a starting of what his stories will become in Metal Gear Solid. Not necessarily like narratively, it's a prequel to Metal Gear Solid, but more from he's starting to play around with the political intrigue of Russia versus the rest of the world, and trying to see like, okay, what can I talk about and what can I kind of like seeing how far away he can get with. Yeah. And after this, he's like, oh, I can talk about Russia and America and say that they're the bad guys and nobody's going to bat an eye. I'm going to go for it. And he just goes for it.
I think that's right. Like this story becomes so interested in Russian, like post-war, Cold War, like USSR Russian interest in like global politics that it really feels like that's where Kojima wants to be, and that is where he will go. And he will do a really great job writing a really weird espionage flick, like movie in Metal Gear Solid. But here it feels like that's almost where he really wants to be going. And I'll give him a lot of credit, because there's a grad student somewhere that would love to write about Snatcher being the best cyberpunk story, because all of the ways that cyberpunk is awful and terrible and is about this countercultural uprising and these subversive elements and the surveillance state and corporate influence on politics and government, all of Snatcher's reality is subsumed in this is what's real, this is what's happened, this is now the 21st century, we have all accepted it. And in many ways, that is maybe the most subversive thing, is that there is no real resistance to the status quo in this world. It has just become happenstance. It has just become the passé of the day, that all of this stuff is normal. And maybe dystopias do not exist in the real world. Dystopias exist in the future. And once it becomes a present, it's just normal. Right. It's all the ways. It's like that gag tweet that somebody wrote where it's like, tech mogul in the Silicon Valley will read a story about the Agonize engine, and all it does is ruin humanity. And then 10 years later, they'll be like, I have finally figured out how to create the famous novel Agony Engine, and we will propel humanity forward with this Agony engine that I've developed.
There's so many tech companies that are named after like the villain of like Palantir. Yeah. That company. Wild that we are in a world, or Palantir, and Skynet. Skynet is another company that exists right now. It's like, why? Speaking of Skynet, One of the big things we mentioned about censorship and everything like that, I wanted to give you a quick rundown of like the Snatchers. They used to be very Terminator, even more so.
They really look like Terminators in this.
It was even more Terminator. That was changed to make it less Terminator. The name of the game started out as New Order, but they didn't want that because he was going to use New Order was something in Metal Gear. So they were like, oh, let's not call it that. Eventually it became Snatchers. Probably because Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Right. It was a classic movie. So again, another thing where they're just taking like references left and right. It's almost as if Snatcher itself is snatching just all these different skins. That's a really good point, and putting it on.
Like, I don't know. I feel like that's Gigabrain moment. That's just like that's in the clickbait title for the YouTube thumbnail video. Like,
Snatchers is a meta narrative masterpiece.
I think in a lot of ways it is, but I think that what makes it meta narrative is that it is really just that the nascency and the early, like the youth, like the youthfulness of the video game industry felt very kind of like we can do whatever we want. Do you remember when streaming was really, really new, since we're old enough to remember like Justin TV and early Twitch TV? And it's like, you could kind of do whatever the fuck you wanted. Copyright? What's a copyright? I could play copyright music and show movies on stream, and then once the rest of reality catches up and goes, oh, you can't just put a Pokemon on a shirt and sell it and make money. It's the Disney copyright law of it all. It feels very much like that's why all this is like. There's certainly artistic merit to making all of these references, these allegories, and these apostrophes in the game. However, a lot of it to me really comes off as just like the youthfulness of video games is that our genre, our medium is in many ways not the free, like it's like this free area where copyright law doesn't really exist and we can kind of do crazy things. Although I guess maybe some of that has to deal with the fact that all of this game was released primarily in Japan, where there's going to be different relationships with that sort of stuff and a less globalized world too.
I mean, they didn't change it until the Sega CD, where they were going to release it in North America for those reasons, right? Like they were, we can just use Geiger's Alien. There was no who's going to tell us, who's going to stop us. It's just a reference, bro. So yeah, it was the bartender in Outer Heaven.
I had a feeling all that stuff was in Outer Heaven.
Yeah, really quick, we mentioned it. Russians are essentially the bad guys. Just to give you, if you haven't played this game, who else could it be? Essentially, long time ago, 50 years ago, we didn't even mention the Lucifer Alpha plague that killed 50% of humanity. That happens to be 50 years before this game starts. Now I've mentioned it. Apparently, at that point in time, the Russians were trying to make these Snatchers because they wanted to kill, all the prime ministers and presidents and put on their own lackeys, and therefore they have control of everything. However, this does not happen. Why? Because of love.
Hell yeah. God. Hell yeah. If it ain't romance, it's no man's to me.
So, the head scientists of this are Elijah Modnar and Mr. Modnar, his father. I don't remember his name, so I'm just going to call him Mr. Modnar. Do you remember?
Johnny Konami and Johnny Modnar.
God damn it. That is... Anyways, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, don't give me any time of day for that.
And so, as part of the project, they get an American scientist to help called Jamie... last name, and
Seed. Well, she has a last name.
Not at that point in time. They're not married yet. And then Gillian Seed comes. Oh, they definitely have a last name. I just don't remember their last name.
Oh, yeah.
Jamie last name. And Gillian Seed is also brought in as a professor. Elijah is in love with Jamie, but Jamie is in love with Gillian. They get married. They have a kid. There's a plot twist that actually works as a plot twist that I did not see coming. Solid. It's actually a pretty solid plot twist, but it doesn't matter for the ending. You learn that Elijah Modnar his project is going to get canceled because the USSR is kind of in a decline. It's about to go out. So he decides, I don't want this to be ended because there's two things I love in life, science and Jamie. And it's literally those two things. He does not care about anything else except Jamie and science. And so he decides to release Lucifer Alpha virus, killing 50% of all humanity. It was just a prank, bro. And then he decides to put himself, Gillian, and Jamie into cryopods. And this is why they look like beautiful mid-20s to 30s
They're in their 30s.
People. Elijah wakes up 10 years later, starts the Snatcher program, and eventually Gillian and Jamie are awoken, but because they've been sleeping for 50 years in the cryo sleep, it for some reason did amnesia. Gillian immediately gets trained in military training. Sure, why not? And gets added to the Junkers 3 years later. God damn it. And we haven't even talked about, nobody's going to get the
Did
suit.
you not want to mention that Gillian's actually an undercover CIA agent from the United States of America?
That in the show notes because it is such a non-issue. It does not matter at all.
So this is that. So okay. Two things. One, I fucking love a villain that's like just evil, just fucking evil. Elijah's motivations are so one-dimensional. I've suddenly come back around to like this actually fucking rocks. Like, yes, I want the villain in my story to be like it I think it really works for the story because the story is dealing with the actual elements of the cyberpunk genre so lightly.
Yes.
That unlike the androids in Blade Runner, who are very morally gray villains, just like Harrison Ford's Deckard is a morally gray android. It's just like in this fucking game, you have the most capital E evil fucking scientist who's just like a spurned lover. Like,
yes.
What horrible motivation. But at the same time, it's like, I love it. I don't know. It's like, so campy.
It put the little, like sexist star on top of the sexist tree of, you know what? It could have been about anything. It really could have been about anything, but it had to be about unrequited unrequested love.
Unrequited. You were right.
Unrequited love. That's what it's all about, Jason.
Okay, I wouldn't say that that's sexist, but we can table that for another day.
I don't think that in a vacuum is sexist, but in the context of Blade Runner, where they have talked, where women do not do anything except be in love with men, it is sexist. Like, if that's the only, like, exploration.
You mean Snatcher.
Snatcher, my bad. What did I say?
You said Blade Runner.
Whoops. No, yeah. Snatcher.
So, yes, I love Elijah for being this evil guy. And it's, I don't know. My second point was just that Act 3 is such a nothing burger. It is such a, when you told me, you messaged me and you said, okay, you're good once you get to Act 3. It's just a movie, just eat dinner. And I was like, what are you talking about? And I started playing. I was like, oh, this is Act 3 of fucking or Act 5 of Sons of Liberty. Like,
yes.
This is nothing. This is really just a fucking movie until that one fucking shooting sequence.
We haven't even talked about the FPS minigame.
Yeah.
Oh, God. And anyways, it just ends up with, like, there's one portion here that is the only, honestly, cyberpunk thing about the whole game, which is Random Hagil. You learn that he is a Random Hagil is just a bounty hunter catching snatchers. You learned before he sacrifices himself, yada yada yada. It's not important.
The whole bounty hunter thing is actually very cyberpunk.
Yes.
But side note.
But they don't do anything with it because he just shows up once and leaves, and then shows up again to die. You learn that he's actually Random Hagil backwards is Elijah Modnar. What? and he's an android created by his father to replace Elijah Monnar because he disappeared, and he just wants a robot that reminds him of his son. And he perfected the skin, he perfected the robot, he ages, it's everything. And then he tries to stop Elijah and like just restrains him, and there's a bit of conversation there about like, oh, you're the copy, you're supposed to die for me or whatever. And he's like, well, if we both die together, then there is no copy, and therefore who is to say which one is the real one and who is not? And that's like literally like, it's like a paragraph of like cyberpunk philosophizing, and that's it. And then they both died in an explosion as Gillian and Jamie run away.
I think the best part about the end of this game is Metal Gear showing back up attached to a Sega CD. That is
he sacrifices himself. It sacrifices himself as well, but he shows up with a new body, which is a Sega CD, and it's great.
Yeah, it's awesome. But I think I want to really try to punctuate here that this is a cyberpunk setting, and it is a cyberpunk story in a lot of ways, and it is not in many ways. And I think your earlier point of bringing up Star Wars is quite relevant to this compared to Star Trek or other cyberpunk stories in this case. And that all that being said, I feel like we're being fairly critical.
Yes.
I really enjoyed my time.
I enjoyed my time.
I think it's a really fun romp. It's really just like a love letter in many ways, I think, to like the 80s action film. It's like in part like 80s action film and in part like detective noir drama. And it's kind of combining those both in what I imagine at the time was a up and coming and kind of underground aesthetic. It's not like you had a ton of cyberpunk stuff everywhere, given that the roots of cyberpunk movement are in the 60s with all of that sort of stuff. Suffice it to say that I think there's a lot to be impressed by, and there's a lot worth checking out in Snatcher, and I think I really enjoyed my time with it. I binged it as well over the weekend.
Yes.
Maybe not the best way to play it, but I
Definitely
really,
not.
Truly could not imagine spending longer than a week with the game either.
I wonder if part of, by the way, 8 hours, Konami was like, this is way too long. We need to make this shorter. And so even Konami, it's interesting because they do too much. Like, I think it needed to be longer, which is why I'm thinking that it
needed to be longer with better UX.
Yes, longer with better UX, which is why I'm very excited if a remake ever gets made that it can like give it the love it deserves. With the fact that I played it over a couple days maybe led to the feeling that it's only been a couple days and these characters are now falling in love and like trusting each other to the death and all that stuff. Maybe if I played it over a few weeks, maybe I would have felt more that this whole story was taking over a longer period of time.
I think
but
the
I'm not
whole
sure.
thing is pretty condensed, though.
It is. But if you're playing it over over a month, like 2 hours maybe there is some case to be said that you would have felt like it was a little bit longer. Maybe, I'm not sure.
I mean, Act 1 is pretty close to Christmas. Act 2 is right before Christmas. Yes. My headcanon is that Act 3 takes place on Christmas Day.
No, it's Christmas of next year. So they've been together for a year.
I don't know. Such a strange game. Was really not expecting to be playing a Christmas game at Christmas time.
No, was not either.
Very shocking. I think I don't necessarily want Snatcher as it is now remade.
No.
I think I want Kojima to take 30 years of game development and storytelling that he has earned over his time and come at it again. Although, he's working on that. Isn't he working on like a PT follow-up with Jordan Peele? I'm pretty sure I heard
maybe?
that.
Question mark? Like, yes.
Right.
That's been said. Whether it's still a thing that's happening or not, I don't know. I feel like PT is cursed. I feel like that's never happening.
Well, PT's cursed, and we already have a Silent Hill 2 remake.
Yes, fair. Very fair. I feel like I would be okay with Kojima coming back, but I kind of also would say temper that with, I would want Kojima to come back, and also maybe the writer of Tokimeki Memorial, or which happens to be also a writer for Symphony of the Night. So crazy.
Wait. Oh yeah, I did know that. Yeah,
you did,
that's
because
awesome.
that's in the video, Tim Rogers' video. So I would want a remake of Snatcher where they add a little bit more meat to the bones of like, okay, make it into 6 acts, sure, and maybe make the women in the game be much more respectful from a, like, the reason I brought the Tokimeki Memorial is because that game does love and does like relationships in a very like respectful way. And so something more like that would be where I would want Snatcher to be, if they really want to maintain that Mika and Jamie and Katrina are possible love interests of Gillian. Like make it maybe a little bit more, maybe make it a little bit more branching, where maybe you do end up with one of them, but it's more not like in the ending that we get right now, which just seems like you're gonna end up being in a polyamorous relationship, like question mark, like it felt very weird.
It was weird. I mean, Mika like said get your mind out of the gutter, Gillian, but yeah, the ending was I think that there's a little too much 80s. Honestly, at the end of the day, it's just that there's just a lot of 80s.
Yeah.
Like the whole game has like a line of coke underneath its nose, but I think that in all the ways that is successful, I think in many ways it is also a pretty big glaring issue with the game. And honestly, I'm shocked that it did so poorly, and I can only attribute that to the kinetic novel and the visual novel being a less interesting genre for the West.
Yeah.
Because like the whole story, everything that's going on feels very on brand for the United States.
There is also another caveat that it was released towards the end of the Sega CD's life cycle as well, which could have also
that's also
hurt sales.
That's a tough console to be on regardless.
Yeah. Honestly, if they would have released it in the West on the PlayStation, it probably would have done much better. From that perspective. I think that it also just comes around with how video games were marketed in North America as for boys, action-packed, manly men type games, where these types of games are a lot more, Japan is just a lot more open to having games that go towards very different audiences, towards women, towards children, towards adults, like all over the place. And therefore, in that world, visual novels can thrive because different perspective and different authors can have their day in the sun. Where in the West, there's such a, like, at that time in the 90s, there was such a, like, being against nerd culture, being against reading, and like the punk aesthetic of the early North America 90s was much more skateboarding, screw the police, we don't need school, all about individualistic hedonism and all these different things that I don't think really works well with the type of game that Snatcher wanted to portray as.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point you bring up about North American and really like American like punk and hardcore punk culture in the 70s and 80s, and how in some ways you would think that it would line up much more closely to video game culture, but in some ways that they were almost like diametrically opposed as both two different countercultures. You had like your nerd culture and stuff like D&D and video games and comic books and those who got access to like manga and anime before like it had its first wave of popularity in the West. And then you had like punk music and skateboarding, and it's two very interesting subsets of counterculture in this time period in the 80s and 90s,
which has overlap. I don't want to say that they're like fighting. They definitely have a lot of overlap.
All culture is amorphous in its own way, but I think to this day there's still a lot of hang-ups around visual novels in the West, and It's a lot more of a narrow genre, and I've been saying to some of my friends for probably a year now or longer that like I just like I'm ready to have like my visual novel awakening. I want to really get into it, and I think kind of like binging this game on my computer over the weekend really lined up for me that I think I need it to be portable. I think I need to be in like a cozier spot. Like
Gotcha.
it's the same way. It's like have you ever like read scanned manga? And it's like it always feels so much more uncomfortable to read the manga on your computer screen than like if you're sitting with like a book or like I've mentioned before that I started reading Berserk and I read that on my iPad in bed, and that is a lot more like I think comfortable for how I want to consume that media.
That's very fair. Yeah, I agree with that. Like there's weirdly enough of just a book. The classics, we reject technology, return to book.
Yes. Yes. Reject modernity, embrace tradition. Yeah.
So, Jason, we're over 2 hours here. Final verdict.
Yes. My final verdict is I think Kojima cooked once again. And Snatcher is, I think, probably one of the most important games historically that we've actually covered. And I think that there is a lot here for an average, like the everyday gamer to check out. I do not think you need to finish the game the whole way through, but I do think that getting through Act 1 is almost required reading for me. But I'm very glad I played it. I think the game has a lot going for it.
So for me, I've since the last recording that we had, I've been going through a bit of a reframing and exploration as to how I want to approach recommendations and scoring systems, especially I'm backlogged. And I've decided to just stop doing scorings by numbers of like, it's 3 out of 10, 10 out of 10, and all that stuff. And instead reframe it as a recommendation system where 5 stars is imperative that everybody plays this. A 3-star is where it hits the depends of like, I recommend this, but only to certain people.
Context.
And with contextual, 4 is just like, I just recommend it to everyone. And I think Snatcher for me does end up being at a 3. For me,
very fair.
A 3 out of 5. I think that Snatcher is very important, but at the end of the day, it is something that I view it kind of as a historical artifact almost, in that if you are a gamer that really wants to study how did we get here, it's imperative that you play this. This is like a game that you need to play. However,
if you have a video game podcast, you have to play this game.
If you have a video game podcast, you have to play this game. However, if you are not somebody like that who are just want to interact with cyberpunk, there are at this day and age, I would say, if like head to head better games, just because they're newer games, your cyberpunks, your Deus Ex Machina. These types of games, you can really just go to town, go get your cyberpunk fix, and not have to go through the headache that is to figure out how to play Snatcher and which version to play in Snatcher.
Yeah, I think part of my, I'll amend mine as well, because you had a really good point, is that is Snatcher worth the headache of figuring out an emulator? And I think it's right on the edge.
Yeah, that's fair.
I think it's right on the edge. And I think what I will say that I feel like is probably worth, I would say is close to required reading, is at least watching Tim Rogers' section in his Tokimeki Memorial review that deals with Snatcher. So that review on Tokimeki Memorial, I came to from Into the Aether playing Tokimeki Memorial. And then I listened to most of his video as I was driving home from New York, and I heard him talking about Snatcher. And I think I messaged you that day, and I was like, I think we need to play Snatcher. And I'm very glad I did. And that video, like what he has to say about Snatcher, I think in maybe 10 minutes or 15 minutes that he actually spends on it is far more concise than we could ever hope to be, because that man is a genius.
Yes.
But
at the same time, not to give us a little bit of props, I would also say that he is definitely a ride or die Snatcher fan, and he loves that, and to the point that he does not mention any of the downsides of Snatcher and all these things. So there is a bit
he's
of
not critical of it whatsoever.
He's not critical of it because he doesn't have to be. It's not a Snatcher review, you know. It's a Tokimeki memorial.
You say that, but Tim Rogers played the game twice to write a memorial about Tokimeki Memorial. Like that man goes well above and beyond. And
that's
my guess is that he probably played the Japanese version.
He played the PC 8801, so the very first one, and he also played the PlayStation Japanese only one.
Yeah. So if anything, that would maybe sway him in a different direction, but I do think like he is ride or die, and that is probably part of required reading for him. And I think for us, it is informative and it is important. And I certainly enjoyed my time with it. And I think I will probably play this game again. Although I would much rather play a remake with better UX.
Yeah. So please, Konami, we will not emulate the remake version. Please, just let me give you money.
We didn't emulate anything. We own images of that CD.
Yeah, we own images of the CD. I burnt it onto a disc and then played it on my Sega CD.
Which can play burned
media.
It can. Can it really?
Yes. Anyways, the most cyberpunk thing you can do is to say, screw you, I'm going to emulate and do the whatever I want.
That is very cyberpunk.
So
video game preservation should not be cyberpunk. Let it be known.
Let it be known. But it is right now.
It should not be. However, my real, for those of you who are still here, my true secret listener only for the true fans verdict is 0 out of 10. There's no fucking items to use.
What? You can use one item. You can use the mask.
That's not. No, the game forces you to put it on and forces you to take it off. That's not using an item. I have to have the choice of not using it to use it. Same way with the cash. It's like a potion. Item to use.
We just hit
key items. Key items aren't items. Sorry.
We just hit the items event horizons. If you do not have an option not to use an item, are you even using an item?
I think that key items are not items, and that will be a Patreon only episode.
Jason, where can they find you?
You can find me on Blue Sky. You can find me personally on Blue Sky at drizzler.bsky.social, whatever. Or you can find the podcast on there, and you can find me at that podcast Blue Sky as well. That's useyouritems.bsky.social.com or whatever. And you can also find me on our Discord, which is linked in the show notes below.
Yeah.
Where can they find you, Fran?
I have a link tree. So if you find Linktree with Frantastico, 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 you can find me. I'm also on Blue. You'll find there my Blue Sky, which is also Frantastico, Twitch, all that fun stuff. And I am also on the Discord. So if you have any questions, if you have any inquiries about my whereabouts, how I should be killed and taken over my skin, that's where you can find it.
Yeah, I think I'll leave it that increasingly as social media becomes more and more bifurcated with the death of Twitter and the issues abounding with Meta, it's, I think, to me, more important than ever to connect with y'all on Discord, because that is the easiest way for us to stay in touch and keep you abreast of everything that's going on. We've been doing monthly streams. We just did a Discord-only stream for the Game Awards, and we did a Twitch restream of the very first Indie Game Awards, that was a fantastic show. If you didn't get a chance to watch it, you should check it out on YouTube for sure.
Definitely. Well, with that, I think that it is the time for us to tell you to not forget to use your items.